Okay, these are my papers. I have two papers, one for rebuttal and one for my cases. All right, I will start my speech in 3, 2, and 1. Panels, crime should not be justified. This motion denies the entire point of justice and makes crime meaningless. What then is the burden of proof of this motion? The burden of proof of this motion is quite simple. It is to prove that prosecution works and that this will prevent crimes. Now then, on to 3 points of rebuttal upon the proposition side. Firstly, the Prime Minister says that prison is enough to deter criminals from actually doing these crimes. That is false. It assumes that people do not do crimes just because it inhibits their freedom, but it fails to actually realize that a lot of people do not do crimes because it makes them actually shunned by society, because society shuns them because they have this guilt and whatnot. That is what their side fails to ever consider. Now then, even if it's true, then we'll still rather have multiple sources of deterrence. We'd still much rather have like 3 sources of deterrence rather than just one. We believe that it makes it more robust and it prevents even more crime from happening. So we can in fact flip this and say that more terrible things will happen in society when you only have prisons to become your deterrence. Because realize that prisons create terrible environments for these criminals. Realize that when you are in prisons, most if not everyone in there has created crime, has done crimes. So they have either murdered people, they have raped people, they have stolen from people. So when he says that it is because that most crime is committed by repeat offenders, I believe that he fails to actually identify the source. He says that, it's because they are labeled as criminals themselves, but he fails to realize that it is because prison is the entire point. Prison makes people actually realize that they are terrible people as well. It lumps them up into people who are terrible. Now this is something that is bad on both sides, but at least our side still has more deterrences. It has deterrences in the form of making people guilty. Now then, secondly, the Prime Minister said that forgetting is necessary to healing. I find this incredibly casuistic. To heal is not to forget. Even if it is, healing, I find the entire point of healing is to come to peace with what happened. It's not to forget everything that happened, but instead it's to forgive what happened. It's to actually forget what happened. Now, when you're forcing people to actually forget what happens, do you seriously think that makes for justified healing? Is that justified for people to heal? Is it justified for people to forget things like that? I don't think it is. Furthermore, forgetting the crime means less wariness. However, they try to frame less wariness as a good thing, but I feel like it's not a good thing at all. Proposition proposes that forgetting about the crime means people don't victim blame. But you must realize that it is quite necessary for this victim blaming to happen. Realize that it is better to be safe than sorry. Any man or woman on the road could kill or rape you or steal from you. Just because people forget about the crime does not mean that it will not happen. Just because some people don't do that crime just doesn't mean that it won't happen. The Prime Minister, it is very well known in sciences that if you did not invent it, if you don't invent it, someone else will. If you don't do this crime, then someone else will. The proposition tries to portray that, just because you forgot about that crime means that no one will ever do that crime again. But realize that it is something that is very well known in sciences. If you did not invent it, someone else will. The Prime Minister brings upon extreme examples. He also says that, you'd be basically assuming that these crimes take up a person's entire mind, that people victim blame because it takes up, that the bad thing about victim blaming is that it takes up a person's entire mind. But then that's another reason you should not credit this argument, because at the very end of the day, most people couldn't care less. They're like, yeah, maybe this person next to me would kill me, but at the end of the day, that is something that is very unlikely to happen. So I do believe that when the government tries to bring this up, you can't actually credit it because it is a very extreme example. Thirdly, their side brings upon criminal labeling. Their side does not have the fiat to say that the perpetrator will be pardoned that the perpetrator will not actually experience the whole point of prison and whatnot, that people will not see the person as someone who has been in prison. Even if they did, they'd backlash on their entire case. So yes, the social stigma of once going to prison would still be there, which I think that the government has tried to preemptive rebuttal, but has failed. In fact, it would be worse on your side because you wouldn't know the severity of the crime. Therefore, when you say that they cannot be attributed to a certain crime, it's in fact this entire point that harms the people who do less severe crimes, because at the end of the day, everything's the same. Someone who's been in prison for stealing, for loitering, in fact, could be lumped up to the same cause as someone who's done corruption, because at the very end of the day, you don't know what the justice system is going to look like. You don't know if whether or not someone who's corrupted would spend the same amount of time in prison as someone who has stolen a chicken, for example, something that's happened in Indonesia. So yes, I believe that their side is not actually improving criminals' likelihood to actually survive, but instead they are lumping them up towards people who have done more wrong, and in that case has actually killed their chances of surviving in the status quo. Now then, let's move on to my arguments. Firstly, on the point of prosecution and how it goes against the entire point. And then secondly, on the point that it makes crime meaningless. Firstly, let's talk about the point of prosecution in itself. I believe that the point of prosecution in itself is firstly upon the point of rehabilitation, and secondly upon the point of retribution of justice. I'll show you how neither of these happen on their side. Firstly, their side's biggest concern is about how people feel like monsters. But realize that that's the entire point of prosecution, the entire point of labeling it a crime. Because it is always monsters who kill and rape people. It is always monsters who do such severe crimes. Imagine the outrage people would have when rapists are pardoned. Imagine you were raped by someone and had that memory wiped from you unwillingly, and the person who raped you is entirely free. Would you be happy about it? Would you, with hindsight of knowing that your memory was wiped, would you be happy? I don't think you would you? Now then, what then are the impacts of this? Firstly, it means that deterrence will never happen. No one wants to be a monster. In this case, forgiveness is not better than not doing it in the first place. Their side says that, we should be able to forgive these monsters in society and make them feel less like monsters and whatnot. But realize that that's the entire point of deterrence. You need to be able to deter people in order to not be able to make crimes. You want people to feel like monsters when they do such horrible crimes. Secondly, the victim does not have their justice on their side. The victim just forgets instantly. Thirdly, the criminals are actually prosecuted on our side. Now then, let's move on to my second argument, upon the point that crimes become meaningless. Realize that the generalization of crime, I've already explained how the generalization of crime exists, how the mechanization of that actually exists in my rebuttals. But what then are the impacts of people actually being generalized for these crimes? Realize that firstly, people do not feel bad about doing crime. Why then does this happen? Because they instantly forget about the severity of the crime that they do. This means that there will be more criminals actually going on. When their side tries to say that, because you're no longer labeled as someone who's done a crime, you say that, people will not do the crime anymore. But then you fail to realize that those people at the very end of the day are monsters. They are people who have willingly done this, who have willingly gone past the deterrence of prison, gone past the deterrence of being labeled a monster, and have actually done those crimes. So I do believe that people will still do the crime when they do not realize the severity of the situation. Secondly, it incentivizes crimes because, hey, no one knows what you did. Why not do it again? That's exactly what I'm trying to say. No one knows what you did, so why not just do it again? See, it's more important, our side thinks that it's more important to actually prevent crime than justify this crime and let criminals live lavishly and whatnot. So the impact of this stretches towards the entire justice system and stretches towards how criminals live themselves. As I've explained in this entire debate, I have posited to you that crimes become meaningless, and I have also posited to you that criminals themselves are treated worse on their side. That is why I am so proud to oppose this motion.